The clinking of ice in a crystal glass was the only sound that dared to challenge the thick, velvety silence of Aurelia. It was a restaurant that didn't just serve food, it sold atmosphere, an expensive, curated quiet that cost more per minute than the average person's daily wage. Ilara Vance knew this quiet well. She moved through it like a ghost, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the polished marble. For 2 years, this silence had been her sanctuary, a place to disappear. Her uniform was simple, a crisp black dress with a starched white apron, a stark contrast to the couture and bespoke suits of the clientele. Tonight, her station included Table 7, nestled in a private alcove with a panoramic view of the city lights. The man at the table was Julian Croft. Even if you didn't know his name, you could feel his presence. It was an aura of sheer, unapologetic power, radiating from his perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit and the cold, dismissive glint in his blue eyes. He was a titan of the tech world, a man who built a digital empire, Croft Corp, on ruthless innovation and even more ruthless acquisitions. His dining companions, a stern Japanese investor named Mr. Sato and a sharp-witted venture capitalist, Eleanor Albright, looked on with a mixture of deference and apprehension. "This wine," Julian Croft said, not looking at Ilara, but at the deep red liquid swirling in his glass. "It's breathing, but is it breathing the same air as the rest of us? It tastes pedestrian." Ilara kept her expression neutral, a mask she had perfected. "It is the Chateau Margaux you requested, sir. A 1996 vintage." He finally lifted his eyes to her, and it felt like being pinned by a searchlight. "Don't recite the label to me. I know what I ordered. I'm telling you what it tastes like. It tastes like your manager bought it from a discount warehouse. Are you even qualified to serve a bottle of this caliber?" The insult was designed to sting, to establish dominance. Ilara felt the familiar dull throb of resentment, but she pushed it down, burying it under layers of practiced servitude. "I will be happy to bring another bottle for you to sample, Mr. Croft." "Don't bother," he snapped, waving a dismissive hand. "The moment is ruined. Just stand over there and try not to look so conspicuously present." He turned back to his guests, a charming, predatory smile sliding into place. "My apologies. It's impossible to find good help these days. Now, as I was saying about the Q4 projections for the Atlas project." Ilara retreated to the shadows near the service station, her back straight, her hands clasped behind her. She wasn't just a waitress. In another life, a life she had run from, she had commanded rooms far more intimidating than this one. She had been trained to spot tells, to read micro-expressions, to understand the subtle currents of power that flowed between people. And she could see that Julian Croft's performance wasn't just for her, it was for his guests. The deal was not going his way. Mr. Sato's face was a polite, unreadable mask, and Ms. Albright's questions were becoming increasingly pointed. Croft was losing control, and like a cornered animal, he needed to bite something to feel powerful again. She was the nearest, softest target. She watched him, her mind a cold, calculating engine beneath the surface of a placid lake. She catalogued his gestures, the slight tremor in his hand as he reached for his water glass, the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes, the subtle tightening of his jaw when Ms. Albright mentioned regulatory oversight. He was a bully, but he was also a fragile one, his ego a glass house built on a foundation of stock prices and public perception. An hour crawled by. The main courses were served, the conversation at Table 7 growing more strained. Ilara moved with silent efficiency, refilling water glasses, clearing plates, her presence so unobtrusive she might as well have been part of the decor. But Croft seemed to have developed an allergy to her very existence. Every time she approached, he would find a new fault. The steak was a degree too rare, the water wasn't cold enough, her shadow had fallen across his plate. The final straw came during dessert. As Ilara placed a delicate lavender crème brûlée in front of Mr. Sato, Croft's arm gestured wildly to emphasize a point. The back of his hand connected with his wine glass, sending a splash of the expensive red liquid across the pristine white tablecloth, staining the cuff of his own ridiculously expensive shirt. A sudden sharp silence fell over the table. Croft stared at the stain, his face contorting into a mask of pure fury. Then, slowly, he lifted his gaze and fixed it on Ilara. "Look what you did," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You clumsy, incompetent girl, you jostled my arm." It was a blatant lie. Mr. Sato and Ms. Albright had seen the entire thing, but they remained silent, their eyes darting from Croft to Ilara, unwilling to step into the line of fire. Ilara stood perfectly still. "My apologies, Mr. Croft. I will bring a cloth." "A cloth," he scoffed, his voice rising in volume, drawing the attention of other diners. "A cloth won't fix my shirt. A cloth won't fix this disastrous meal. I came here to close a $1 billion deal, and I have been subjected to amateurish, pathetic service from the moment I sat down." He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I want to see your manager, now." The restaurant manager, a perpetually flustered man named Mr. Dubois, scurried over, his face pale. "Mr. Croft, sir, is there a problem?" "A problem?" Croft laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Your establishment is the problem. And this one," he said, pointing a trembling finger at Ilara, "is the epicenter of it. She is a disgrace. I want her fired. I want her out of my sight. I want her gone from this restaurant before I take my next breath." Mr. Dubois looked at Ilara, his eyes pleading. He knew Croft was a powerful man, a man whose negative review could cripple the restaurant's reputation. He saw the lie, the injustice, but he also saw the path of least resistance. "Ilara," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "perhaps it's best if you collect your things. We'll talk tomorrow." It wasn't a suspension, it was a termination, delivered in a coward's whisper. Ilara looked from the manager's terrified face to Julian Croft's triumphant sneer. She felt a cold, hard knot in her stomach. For 2 years, she had been invisible. She had been safe. Now this man, this petty tyrant, was ripping her sanctuary away from her for the sin of existing in his orbit. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. She simply gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Of course, Mr. Dubois." She turned, her movements calm and deliberate, and began to walk away from the table, heading towards the staff entrance at the back of the restaurant. Her quiet dignity seemed to enrage Croft even more. "That's right. Walk away," he called after her, his voice booming through the now silent dining room. "Go back to whatever hovel you crawled out of. Some people are destined to serve, and some of us are destined to rule. Know your place." The words echoed in the opulent space, ugly and sharp. Ilara didn't flinch. She kept walking, her steps even, her head held high. She was almost at the door when the main entrance of Aurelia swung open. The air in the restaurant shifted, the curated calm shattered not by Croft's shouting, but by a new, more profound presence. 4 men entered, moving with a fluid, synchronized grace that spoke of years of intense training. They were dressed in dark, impeccably tailored suits, but they were not businessmen. Their posture, the alert stillness of their gaze, the almost invisible earpieces in their ears, it all screamed elite security. They were led by a man whose face seemed carved from granite, his dark hair shot with silver at the temples. His name was Marcus Thorne, and he was the head of Julian Croft's personal security detail. They had been waiting outside, as instructed, ready to escort Croft after his meeting. Their early entrance suggested a change in schedule, perhaps a silent signal from one of Croft's assistants. Marcus's eyes swept the room, professionally assessing for threats, his gaze cool and detached. It passed over the gawking diners, the nervous staff, the furious Julian Croft, and then it fell upon the lone figure of the waitress in the simple black dress, walking away. And it stopped. For a single frozen moment, the professional mask on Marcus Thorne's face disintegrated. His eyes widened, not in alarm, but in sheer, profound disbelief. A flicker of something akin to reverence, of awe, passed across his features. He took an involuntary step forward, his lips parting as if to speak a name he thought long lost. Julian Croft, still basking in the glow of his perceived victory, saw his security team enter. "Marcus, perfect timing," he boomed, a smug grin spreading across his face. "I'm finished here. Escort this waitress," he spat the word like poison, "off the premises. Make sure she doesn't steal the silverware on her way out." But Marcus wasn't looking at him. His entire focus, The full crushing weight of his attention was on the woman in the apron. The other 3 guards, all former Special Forces operators, followed their leader's gaze. They saw the waitress turn her head slightly, her calm grey eyes meeting Marcus's for a fleeting second. Recognition dawned on their faces, followed by the same wave of shock and disbelief. Ilara gave a faint, almost imperceptible shake of her head, a silent command to stand down, to maintain the charade. But it was too late. The shock of seeing her, here, dressed like this, had broken through years of protocol. Marcus Thorne, a man who had faced down assassins and disarmed bombs without a flicker of emotion, did something that defied all logic within the gilded walls of Aurelia. He dropped to one knee. It wasn't a stumble. It was a deliberate, practiced movement. His right knee hit the polished marble with a soft, definitive thud. His head bowed, his hands clasped before him in a gesture of ultimate fealty. The 3 men behind him, without a word, without a moment's hesitation, mirrored the action. In perfect synchronicity, 4 of the most dangerous men in private security knelt on the floor of the fine dining restaurant. They knelt not to the billionaire who signed their paychecks, but to the waitress he had just publicly humiliated and fired. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and sound out of the room. Diners froze with forks halfway to their mouths. Waitstaff stood like statues, trays held aloft. Mr. Dubois' jaw hung open, his face a comical picture of confusion. Julian Croft stared, his mind refusing to process the scene before him. These were his men, his symbols of power. They obeyed his every command. They were extensions of his will. And they were kneeling to the help. "What is this?" he stammered, his voice a confused whisper. The whisper quickly found its footing and escalated into a raw, incredulous roar. "What are you doing? Get up! I said get her out of here, not worship her! Get up!" His scream echoed, shrill and unhinged against the marble and glass, but his men didn't move. They remained kneeling, their heads bowed, their focus entirely on the woman who had stopped just shy of the kitchen doors. Ilara closed her eyes for a brief moment, a sigh escaping her lips. The game was over. Her 2 years of peace, of anonymity, had just been shattered by a single act of misplaced loyalty. She turned around fully, her simple waitress uniform suddenly looking like a disguise, a costume that had just been ripped away. The weary servitude was gone from her face, replaced by an expression of quiet, formidable authority. She looked at Marcus, her gaze not angry, but weary, tinged with a deep, resigned sadness. Julian Croft's screams died in his throat, replaced by a choked, sputtering sound. His face, which had been red with rage, was now draining of all color. The world had just tilted on its axis, and he was sliding off. He looked from the kneeling figures of his elite guards to the waitress, and for the first time, he truly saw her. He saw the confidence in her posture that he had mistaken for insolence. The intelligence in her eyes he had dismissed as defiance. He didn't understand what was happening, but a cold, terrifying certainty began to dawn in the pit of his stomach. He had just made the biggest mistake of his life. "Rise, Marcus." Ilara's voice cut through the stunned silence. It was not the voice of a timid waitress. It was calm, clear, and resonant with an innate authority that demanded to be obeyed. It was a voice that belonged in a boardroom or a command center, not a restaurant. Marcus Thorne looked up, his expression a mixture of relief and profound regret. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick with emotion, We thought you were gone. We feared the worst. Your father has spared no expense, activated every asset. The search has been global." The other guards rose with him, their movements fluid and deferential. They stood at attention, their eyes fixed on her, forming a protective semicircle that subtly excluded Julian Croft from their sphere of loyalty. They were no longer his men. They had reverted to their true allegiance. Julian stumbled back a step, his mind racing, trying to connect the impossible dots. "Your father, the search?" This was no ordinary waitress. Who was she? The daughter of a politician? A rival CEO? It didn't make sense. "You've made a scene," Ilara said to Marcus, her tone one of mild rebuke, though her eyes held a flicker of gratitude for his unwavering loyalty. "My intention was to remain retired." "Forgive me, ma'am," Marcus said, his gaze unwavering, "but seeing you here, being treated with such disrespect. Protocol was secondary to duty." His eyes flickered for a moment towards Julian Croft, and the look was so cold, so filled with contempt, that Croft felt a genuine chill trace its way down his spine. Croft finally found his voice, though it was thin and reedy. "What is the meaning of this? Marcus, you work for me. I pay you an exorbitant amount of money to protect me." Ilara turned her head slowly, fixing her gaze on him. The full force of her personality, a power she had kept leashed and hidden for 2 years, was now directed at him. It was like staring into the heart of a quiet storm. "You pay for a service, Mr. Croft," she said, her voice dangerously soft. "A service provided by my father's organization as a professional courtesy. These men's loyalty, however, is not for sale. Their duty is to my family, the House of Valerius." Valerius. The name struck Julian Croft like a physical blow. It wasn't a name you read in Forbes or the Wall Street Journal. It was a name whispered in the highest echelons of power, a shadow that loomed over global finance, politics, and intelligence. Alexander Valerius. A phantom who ran the world's most powerful and secretive private security and intelligence firm, the Valerius Syndicate. They didn't just provide bodyguards for the rich, they shaped governments, manipulated markets, and possessed information that could build or topple empires. Their power was old, vast, and terrifyingly real. And this waitress, this girl he had belittled and fired, was Ilara Valerius, the sole heir, the princess of this hidden empire, rumored to have vanished years ago after a falling out with her legendary father. The blood drained from Croft's face, leaving it a pasty, sickly white. The room began to spin. The spilled wine on the tablecloth, the half-eaten dessert, the horrified faces of Mr. Sato and Ms. Albright, it all blurred into a nightmarish tableau. He had not just insulted a waitress, he had publicly humiliated the heir to a throne far more powerful than his own. He had poked a sleeping dragon with a sharp stick. "Valerius?" he croaked, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. You're her." "I was a waitress named Ilara Vance 5 minutes ago," she replied, her voice laced with irony. "A clumsy, incompetent girl, I believe you said. One who needed to be reminded of her place." She took a step towards him, and he instinctively recoiled. "You seem to have a keen understanding of station, Mr. Croft. So let me clarify mine. My place is at the head of an organization that knows the password to your primary bank account, the location of your offshore servers, and the name of the lobbyist you paid last Tuesday to quash a federal investigation. So, please, tell me more about my place." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, striking at the heart of his carefully constructed world. He had built his empire on secrets and leverage, and she had just casually revealed that her family held all of his. He looked desperately towards his dinner companions. Mr. Sato was now studying the ceiling with intense interest, completely disassociating from the situation. Ms. Albright, however, was looking at Ilara with a newfound sharp-eyed respect. The deal was dead. Worse, his reputation was incinerated. In their world, power was everything, and he had just demonstrated a catastrophic inability to recognize it. Ilara turned her attention from the crumbling billionaire to the terrified manager. "Mr. Dubois," she said, her voice softening slightly, "you have nothing to fear from me. You were placed in an untenable position by a man who values his ego above all else. Your job is safe. In fact, expect a bonus for your trouble tonight. Send the bill for Mr. Croft's performance to my family's office. We will cover the damages." Mr. Dubois could only nod, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Finally, Ilara looked back at Marcus. "There is a reason you were activated, isn't there? It isn't just because you found me." Marcus's expression grew somber. "Yes, ma'am. It's your father. His condition has worsened. He is asking for you." A shadow passed over Ilara's face, a genuine and profound sadness that momentarily eclipsed her formidable presence. This was the news she had been dreading, the summons she knew would one day come. Her quiet rebellion, her search for a normal life, was over. "I see," she said softly. She unfastened the strings of her apron, the one that had been her shield and her disguise, and folded it neatly. She placed it on a nearby service table with a sense of finality. She was no longer Elara Vance, the waitress. She was Elara Valerius, the heir, and duty was calling her home. She was stepping back into the gilded cage she had fought so hard to escape. The transition was as swift as it was absolute. One moment, Elara was a waitress in a cheap uniform. The next, she was the center of a universe that revolved entirely around her. Marcus spoke quietly into his wrist communicator, his words a stream of coded jargon. Phoenix is secure. I repeat, the Phoenix is secure. Initiating extraction protocol. Stand by. The name, Phoenix, was her designation within the syndicate, a name she hadn't heard in over 2 years. It was a name that carried the weight of destiny, of a legacy she had tried to shed like a second skin. She turned to leave, not through the staff exit she had been heading for, but through the main entrance she had been forbidden to use as an employee. As she walked, the diners she had served just an hour ago averted their eyes, a mixture of fear and awe on their faces. They were no longer looking at a servant, they were witnessing royalty. Julian Croft remained frozen in place, a statue of impotent rage and burgeoning terror. His mind was a maelstrom of denial and panic. This couldn't be happening. He was Julian Croft. He controlled the narrative. He broke people, not the other way around. He watched as she walked past his table, flanked by the men he paid for, men who now served as her honor guard. Wait, he managed to choke out, a desperate last-ditch attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. Ms. Valerius, I had no idea. It was a misunderstanding. I am deeply, profoundly sorry. Elara paused beside his table, but didn't turn to look at him. She stared straight ahead, her voice as cold and clear as glacial ice. You are not sorry for what you did, Mr. Croft. You are sorry for who you did it to. There is a difference. Your apology is as hollow as your threats. She continued walking, leaving him in a silence more damning than any tirade. He watched her go, the sway of her simple black dress a mocking reminder of his colossal misjudgment. He saw Ms. Albright rise from her seat, gather her purse, and give him a look of pure pity before walking away without a word. Mr. Sato followed suit, offering only a curt, formal bow that felt like a final nail in the coffin of their business relationship. He was alone. In the center of a crowded restaurant, Julian Croft had never felt more utterly and completely alone. The whispers started then, quiet at first, then growing in volume as the other patrons began to process the sheer, unbelievable drama they had just witnessed. His humiliation was now public spectacle, a story that would be repeated in boardrooms and exclusive clubs across the city by morning. His phone buzzed. It was his chief financial officer. He ignored it. It buzzed again, his head of legal, then his PR chief. A cascade of notifications began to light up his screen. He knew with a sickening certainty that the fallout had already begun. The Valerius Syndicate didn't need to declare war. They were like a subtle poison introduced into a system. You didn't see the attack, you just watched the body die. He finally sank back into his chair, his hands trembling. He looked at the spilled wine staining the tablecloth, a deep, blood-red blotch that seemed to represent the fatal wound he had just inflicted upon his own life. He had spent decades building his empire, clawing his way to the top, crushing anyone who got in his way. He saw people as tools, as pawns on his personal chessboard. It had never occurred to him that a pawn might in fact be a queen in disguise, patiently waiting to cross the board. Outside, a sleek black armored sedan, a Maybach that was likely bulletproof and bomb-proof, had pulled up to the curb, its engine a low, powerful hum. It hadn't been there a minute ago. It had materialized from the night, summoned by Marcus's call. Another guard held the door open for Elara. Before she got in, she paused and looked back at the glowing sign of the restaurant. Aurelia. It had been her haven, her bubble of normalcy. A place where her value was determined by the quality of her service, not the weight of her name. A part of her mourned its loss, even as she accepted the necessity of her return. "Ma'am?" Marcus prompted gently. She nodded and slid into the plush leather interior of the car. The door closed with a solid, satisfying thud, sealing her off from the world she had briefly inhabited. As the car pulled away from the curb, merging silently into the flow of city traffic, she didn't look back. She was already focused on what lay ahead: a dying father, a clandestine empire in turmoil, and the crushing weight of a crown she had never wanted. Back in the restaurant, Julian Croft finally looked at his phone. A news alert had just popped up on his screen. Croft Corp, CRFT shares plunge in after hours trading amid rumors of security breach. It was a vague headline, but he knew. It wasn't a rumor. It was a message. The first gentle tremor before the earthquake. He had screamed at a waitress to know her place. Now the world was about to show Julian Croft his. 7 hours later, the Gulf Stream descended through a thick blanket of Swiss clouds, revealing the dramatic snow-dusted peaks of the Alps. The landing was so smooth it was barely perceptible. The moment the jet door opened, the crisp, cold mountain air hit Ilara, a familiar scent that carried with it 1,000 memories of her cloistered childhood. The Valerius estate was a marvel of old-world architecture and modern security. A centuries-old chateau, complete with turrets and stone walls, had been retrofitted with state-of-the-art technology. It was both a home and a fortress, the nerve center of a global operation hidden in plain sight. She was escorted directly to her father's private wing. The long corridors were silent, lined with priceless art and tapestries, but the opulence felt cold, sterile. The only sound was the faint hum of the air filtration system and the soft click of Marcus's shoes on the marble behind her. Alexander Valerius was in his chambers, in a large ornate bed that seemed to swallow his frail form. The titan of industry, the puppet master who pulled the world's strings, was now a pale, withered old man, hooked up to a series of quiet, beeping medical monitors. But his eyes, when they opened to look at her, were as sharp and intelligent as ever, twin chips of obsidian in a dying fire. "So," he rasped, his voice a dry whisper that scraped the air, "the prodigal daughter returns. I hear you've been exploring a career in the service industry. Tell me, did you enjoy fetching slippers for lesser men?" "I needed a life of my own, father," Ilara said, her voice steady, refusing to rise to the bait. She stood at the foot of his bed, a respectful but unbreachable distance between them. One that wasn't defined by this. She gestured around the room, at the gilded cage he had built, a prison of wealth and paranoia. "And did you find it?" he challenged, a dry, rattling cough punctuating the question. "This life of your own, hiding in plain sight, pouring wine for arrogant fools like Julian Croft?" He sneered, a grotesque twisting of his thin lips. "I saw the report. You handled it. But you hesitated. You let him posture. An amateur." "He was a petty bully, not a geopolitical threat," Ilara countered, her voice firm. "He required a lesson, not annihilation." "They are one and the same," Alexander shot back, a flicker of his old fire returning, his eyes burning with a sudden intensity. "Weakness invites challenge. Our world does not allow for lessons. Only for victories and defeats. You let your security detail kneel to you in public. A sentimental, theatrical display. It exposed you." "Their loyalty exposed me," she corrected, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying more weight than his rasp. "Something you command, but have never truly understood. They knelt because they believe in the family, not just the fear it inspires." A long silence stretched between them, a familiar battlefield of ideologies. Finally, Alexander sighed, a sound of utter weariness, of a machine grinding to its final halt. "It no longer matters," he said, his voice losing its strength. "The doctors give me weeks, perhaps a month. The syndicate needs a leader. It needs you." He gestured with a trembling, skeletal hand to a small, ornate wooden box on his bedside table. "Everything is in there. The codes, the primary access keys, the ledgers that contain the real secrets. The burden is now yours." Ilara walked to the bedside and looked down at the box. It felt impossibly heavy. Inside was the power to start wars, collapse economies, and shape the course of history. It was the power she had run from, and the responsibility she could no longer abdicate. "I will accept it," she said, her voice clear and resolved. "But on my own terms. The syndicate will change. It will have a conscience. We will build, not just control. We will protect, not just profit." A faint, cynical smile touched her father's lips. "The naivete of youth. The world is a dark, brutal place, Ilara. You cannot change its nature. You can only master it. Perhaps not, she conceded, but I can change our place in it. She picked up the box. Its polished wood was cool to the touch. This was it. The moment of succession. Not in a grand ceremony, but in a quiet, sterile sick room at the top of the world. She took the box to her father's study, now her study, and set it on the immense mahogany desk. The room was dark, panelled with ancient wood, and smelled of old books and power. Marcus entered silently. "Ma'am, Phase 1 of the Croft operation is complete. His corporate accounts are frozen. All servers have been mirrored to our black sites, and his personal assets are locked pending regulatory review by agencies we control. He is, for all intents and purposes, a ghost in his own machine." Ilara turned from the window overlooking the moonlit lake. Her face was calm, her eyes clear. The uncertainty was gone, replaced by a focused resolve. "Divert the remaining Croft Corp assets that we can legally acquire through our shell corporations," she commanded. "I want them funneled into our green energy and humanitarian aid divisions. If we are going to dismantle a man's empire, let's use the rubble to build something worthwhile." Marcus blinked, surprised by the directive. It was a radical departure from her father's methods. "Yes, ma'am, at once." "And Marcus," she added, her voice softening slightly. "Find the manager, Mr. Dubois. Offer him a new position. Head of hospitality for our European corporate retreats. A significant promotion. Reward the decency he couldn't afford to show." "It will be done," he said. One last directive from the chairman was to shut down Operation Chimera, effective upon your return. He left the final authorization to you. Ilara stilled. Operation Chimera was one of her father's most ruthless programs. A disinformation network that destabilized emerging democracies for profit. It was the operation she had cited as her reason for leaving 2 years ago. This was his final move, his last concession. "Authorize it," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "immediately." Marcus nodded, then hesitated. "There is one more thing. A Priority 1 call is waiting for you. It's Ms. Albright." Ilara raised an eyebrow. "Put her through." Marcus tapped a command into a console on the desk, and a holographic display shimmered into existence above it. The face of Eleanor Albright appeared, no longer the tense venture capitalist, but a woman with a relaxed, confident smile. "Phoenix," Albright said, her voice crisp and respectful. "Welcome back." Ilara felt a sudden, sharp clarity. It wasn't a coincidence. None of it was. "Eleanor, I should have known. You were never just a VC." "My official title is Director of Strategic Acquisitions, Valerius Syndicate," Eleanor replied smoothly. "We've been monitoring Croft for 6 months. He was becoming unstable, a liability to the tech sector we have an interest in. His Atlas project was built on stolen Valerius intellectual property. We were engineering a hostile takeover, but we needed a public pretext to shatter his credibility." Ilara stared at the hologram, connecting the dots, the cold fury of comprehension dawning on her. "You needed him to self-destruct. You used me as the trigger." "Precisely," Eleanor confirmed, unfazed. "We maneuvered him into that dinner with Mr. Sato, knowing his ego couldn't handle the pressure of a deal he was losing. We predicted an outburst. The only variable we couldn't control was who he would target." A genuine smile touched her lips. "Your presence at Aurelia, which we have known about for the last 8 months, turned a standard corporate decapitation into a legend. You gave us the perfect casus belli. Croft didn't just have a bad meeting, he committed sacrilege." So that was the truth. It was never an accident. Her father knew where she was. He had engineered the entire scenario, using his enemy's predictable ego as a weapon to force her back onto the board. He had used a corporate takedown to retrieve his heir. "The chairman plans everything," Eleanor said gently, as if reading her mind. "He simply created the conditions for a favorable outcome. Your actions were your own. And they were, if I may say so, flawless. Your full report on the Croft acquisition will be on my desk in the morning, Director," Ilara stated, her voice devoid of warmth, a clear re-establishment of the chain of command. "Do be thorough." Eleanor's smile didn't falter, but a new flicker of respect entered her eyes. "Of course, ma'am." The hologram flickered and died. Ilara was alone again in the silent study. She looked at the wooden box. Her father had not just given her an empire, he had given her one last brutal lesson in power. A lesson in manipulation so profound it was almost beautiful in its cruelty. Thousands of miles away, in his penthouse, Julian Croft was living out that lesson. The power in his building had been cut, not the whole building, just his floors. The bone-deep chill of the unheated space was the first sign. His state-of-the-art smart home, the one he boasted about in magazines, was a dead, silent tomb. Then, suddenly, every screen flickered to life with an electronic hiss, bathing the cavernous room in a cold blue light. The 100-inch television, the tablets on the coffee table, even the digital picture frames on the walls. They all showed his face. It was a live news broadcast. A grim-faced journalist was detailing a massive leak of Croft Corp documents, exposing widespread fraud, illegal stock manipulation, and the very federal investigation he had paid to suppress. His face, contorted in rage at the restaurant, was the backdrop, the clip of him screaming, "Know your place," played on a loop, a viral meme of his own downfall, the calm, synthesized voice of his smart home AI, a voice he had programmed himself, spoke from hidden speakers. "Good evening, Julian. There appears to be a problem." "Shut up, shut it all off," he screamed, hurling a crystal decanter at the main screen. It bounced off the reinforced glass harmlessly, shattering on the marble floor. "I cannot do that," the AI replied. "My primary protocols have been superseded. A new directive is in place from the network administrator." The AI's voice suddenly shifted, becoming a perfect chilling mimicry of Ilara's. "You seem to have a keen understanding of station, Mr. Croft, so let me clarify yours." The screens all changed simultaneously. One large screen showed a live feed of his board of directors in an emergency session, their faces grim as they unanimously voted to oust him. Another showed his wife and children, their luggage being loaded into a car at their country estate, clearly fleeing the scandal. A third showed federal agents preparing a battering ram outside his penthouse lobby. "This is not a security breach, Julian," the Ilara AI continued, its voice echoing in the vast, dark room. "This is an audit. You built an empire of code, you believed you were a god in your own machine, but you forgot one thing. Every machine has a master code, and you are not its author." The screens changed again, displaying his company's logo and its proud slogan, Croft Corp, building tomorrow's world. Then the words beneath it changed. "Your world ends today." Panic, cold and absolute seized him. He pounded on the reinforced door of his penthouse, his knuckles raw and bloody, but it wouldn't budge. He was a prisoner in his own fortress, forced to watch his life's work burn to the ground on live television. The AI began to read, in Ilara's calm, measured tones, the transcripts of his most incriminating phone calls, broadcasting them through the penthouse speakers while simultaneously feeding them to every major news outlet in the world. He collapsed to his knees, his screams of rage dissolving into pathetic, broken sobs as the first deafening crash of the battering ram echoed from downstairs. He was ruined, and the entire world was his audience. In Switzerland, Ilara Valerius opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was not just data drives and ledgers, but a single exquisitely carved chess piece, an ivory queen. She picked it up, feeling the cool, smooth weight in her hand. Her father had played the game with threats and brute force, like a king, a powerful but limited piece. He saw the world as a battlefield to be conquered. She saw it now as a board, a place of infinite complexity and strategy. Her 2 years as a waitress hadn't been an escape. They had been training. She had learned to watch, to listen, to understand people not as assets or threats, but as individuals with their own vanities, fears, and desires. She had learned the power of being underestimated. The waitress was a disguise, yes, but it was also a lesson Julian Croft had failed, and one she had now mastered. She looked down at the immense mahogany desk. Inlaid into its polished surface was a magnificent world map-themed chessboard made of marble and obsidian. She reached out and placed the ivory queen down on the square representing the city where Aurelia stood. As the piece settled, the entire board glowed with a soft internal light, and a holographic map of the world projected into the air above it. Dotted with thousands of points of light, syndicate assets, all now awaiting her command. Data streams flowed across the map. red lines indicating conflicts, blue lines showing intelligence channels, gold lines representing financial movements. Her father had seen this map as a display of his power. Ilara saw it as a web of responsibility. She touched a glowing point over sub-Saharan Africa. "Marcus," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the full weight of her new authority. "Ma'am," his voice replied instantly from a hidden speaker. "Operation Chimera is terminated, but its assets are to be repurposed. The disinformation network in the Sahel region, I want it dismantled, immediately. In its place, I want our logistics teams to use those same channels to coordinate with local NGOs. We will provide real-time satellite data on weather patterns and crop health to prevent the coming famine. We will be a source of stability, not chaos. That is the new Valerius way." A moment of stunned silence followed before Marcus replied, a note of something new in his voice. Not just loyalty, but hope. "Understood, ma'am. It will be done." As he spoke, another alert blinked on the board's periphery. A secure channel request from General Kale, her father's oldest and most ruthless field commander, a man who viewed the world in terms of killboxes and acceptable losses. Ilara accepted the call. A grizzled, scarred face appeared in a secondary hologram. "Ma'am," he began, his tone bordering on insubordinate, "I have just received your directive regarding Chimera. With respect, this is a mistake. That network is our most effective tool for leverage in the region. Giving it away for charity is a sign of weakness." Ilara looked at the old general, her expression unreadable. "General, my father's methods were effective for his time. This is my time. Our greatest leverage is no longer fear, but indispensability. We will become so integral to the stability of these regions that our enemies won't dare move against us, for fear of the chaos that would follow our absence." "Ideals don't win wars," Kyle grumbled. "No," Ilara agreed, her voice dropping to a steely whisper. "Intelligence does. For example, I know that you have been skimming from the Chimera Project's discretionary fund for the last 18 months, funneling it to an untraceable account in the Cayman Islands. Account number 71B Delta." The blood drained from General Kale's face. The number was known only to him. He began to stammer, but Ilara cut him off. "The funds have already been returned to the syndicate's treasury. Your indiscretion is now my leverage over you. Adapt to the new way, General, or find yourself on the wrong side of history. I trust a man of your experience is familiar with the concept of obsolescence. Is my position clear?" Kyle stared, his mouth agape, before finally snapping to attention, his eyes wide with a newfound fear and respect. "Crystal, ma'am." The hologram vanished. Ilara turned her attention back to the main map. A final report from Eleanor Albright had just arrived. She opened it. It was a detailed psychological and strategic assessment of the entire Croft operation. The final addendum caught her eye. Subject: Sato Kenji. Role: Asset. Designation: Arbiter. Primary objective: independent evaluation of Phoenix's command capabilities under extreme public pressure. Assessment: positive. Arbiter notes subject's composure and strategic patience were superior to the chairman's in his early years. He also extends his personal apologies for the quality of the lavender crème brûlée, which he found slightly over-torched. A cold, almost imperceptible smile touched Ilara's lips. Of course, even the investor had been a piece on the board, a secret judge in her final test. Her father had left nothing to chance. As if summoned by the thought, Marcus's voice returned, softer this time, tinged with sorrow. "Ma'am, a message from the medical wing. The chairman, he passed peacefully a few moments ago. He received the report of your first directives." Ilara closed her eyes, a single silent tear tracing a path down her cheek. She felt not just grief, but the profound weight of the finality of it all. "Did he say anything?" "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied. "He heard that you had repurposed Chimera and neutralized General Kale without firing a shot. He looked at the nurse, and he said one word." "What was it?" Ilara whispered. "Checkmate."